Hi everyone, this is Toygun from TBWA Istanbul, and today I have Agathe Guerrier, the global CSO of TBWA with me, and we are here for Brand Week Istanbul 2020. We're going to talk about brand strategies in the times of COVID. Hi Agathe, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. In March 2020, when the pandemic arrived, we were in a panic and we were talking about recovery strategies for all the brands, for all our brands we're working with. But time has showed that recovery is not that soon, and we're still working through pandemic and still talking about the second wave of COVID-19 in most countries. And it seems like all brands should adapt to this era where it's going on for a while. It's like living with the viruses is the new normal for most of us. So, what is the biggest learning for brands in 2020? And while we're getting ready for the next year, for the coming year, what should brands do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think your observation that I think in March we anticipated that we would be in recovery and revival by now, and so the new normal would be a post-COVID normal. I think what we're all starting to realize now is the new normal is in the middle of COVID new normal, unfortunately. And for us, the biggest learning is probably that every brand has now become or needs to become a wellness brand. So in the same way that, the past decade, the 2010s, was all about brand really needing to reach for their sense of purpose, and social responsibility around, especially the environment, became a marketing imperative. Our big prediction is that in the next decade, so the 2020s, every brand will need to have a point of view on wellness and how it's contributing to the wellness of humanity. And there's a number of things that are driving this.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry?
When you say wellness, it's not really about to feel good. When we think about wellness, it's more about spas and having a treat for yourself. But this time the terminology has shifted a bit, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the big trends and the big reasons why we see wellness as gaining in importance is wellness and health are really converging. So as you said, wellness tended to feel quite kind of supplemental, or superficial or additional in the past. And a lot of the products and the categories that were associated with wellness were, not particularly taken seriously. I think there's a big change that's happening now. And so wellness now entails a huge category of need states that go from just, being well and healthy all the way to being mentally and almost spiritually content. And that's also happening in traditional medicine. I mean, when I say traditional, I mean conventional, the actual doctors. I think for a long time, the medical field and healthcare was very curative. So the purpose and the focus was treating illness, right? And what we're seeing now is that healthcare professionals themselves are starting to embrace a wellness approach. I live in the US, and it's interesting to see here how suddenly the prevalence of lifestyle illnesses has come full center, because there are huge factor of comorbidity in COVID outcomes. So people are dying here, sadly, at a much higher rate in the US because so many people had pre-existing illnesses, whether that's obesity or diabetes or high blood pressure. And so I think suddenly COVID has created this big realization in the medical community that, all these underlying health conditions are very serious. And the way to address them is through lifestyle factors. So increasingly doctors are talking about nutrition as being almost the first port of call.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so when it comes to brands that are not especially about wellness or health, like when it comes to food and beverage or fitness brands, it's easier for me to link it with wellness. But when it comes to all other brands, because you mentioned that all brands should become a wellness brand or should have a wellness strategy. How that could happen? Are there some examples that you see?
Yeah, I think that that's interesting that we are seeing wellness, come up in less expected places, as you say, than kind of food. Banking is a big area where we're seeing the notion of financial wellness really gain in relevance. So in our /magazine Edge, we interview a financial therapist. Her name is Lindsay Bryan Potvin, and she talked about the fact that the idea of financial wellness was kind of bubbling under before the pandemic, and now with COVID-19 having precipitated a lot of people into either financial insecurity or at least the concern about future financial insecurity, it's becoming really top of mind. And interestingly, actually, HSBC has recently reoriented a big part of their marketing strategy towards financial well-being. So creating, services and products that are not just, selling a mortgage or selling a new account or selling a new credit card, but thinking about how they can be holistic financial wellness partners for their customers.
You mentioned Edge magazine. Maybe we can give some information about that.
Yeah. So it's our first magazine. It's very exciting. Well, we should maybe talk about Backslash, because I don't know that everyone necessarily knows what it is. So Backslash is TBWA's cultural intelligence unit. So it's a team. Well, there's a small team that sits in LA, but then there's over 250 spotters who sit in, I think, over 160 of our TBWA offices. And so our spotters are, of course, including Turkey. Turkey is one of our star contributors to Backslash. And so the spotters are constantly kind of, signaling and letting us know what cultural triggers they're observing in their local cultures. And then the role of the central team is to try and identify, what are the macro trends that we can see emerging out of the multitude of triggers. And so there's an annual publication of the year's edges. And so edges are these kind of big, long-term, significant, meaningful trends that are, that rise above the triggers to create meaningful cultural shifts. Oh, sorry, I didn't talk about the magazine. And so the magazine, it was published in September. It's our first kind of magazine publications. We've put out documentaries before, but this is the first magazine. It's available online at backslash.com/edge. And I hope you will check it out. It's really rich. I mean, I think it's a really interesting deep dive into the future wave of wellness. I think what's worth mentioning actually is the team started working on the magazine before COVID. So some of the writing was done in February and March. And then, as you said, we all panicked. so we stopped for a bit and then came back to it in the summer. And so it's got that interesting perspective of, what were the kind of cultural undercurrents that were already at play? And then how is COVID, accelerating or in some cases, actually putting a damper on some of them. So it's interesting that it's got this kind of dual lens of pre and during COVID. I'm not saying post anymore, this.
Yes. And in this magazine, I came across some new terminology that were very interesting, like sleep wellness, sexual wellness, death wellness. I think that's the most interesting one because it's hard to imagine death and wellness go together. Maybe we can also talk about those new ideas.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, we tried to cover a spectrum of the obvious places where you would expect wellness to be a growing theme, like food and fitness. Sorry, someone's honking their car. But we also touch on some of the new and emerging industries where actually we think brands should invest and start thinking about how they can make that part of their strategy. So sleep, sex, and death are all part of these new emerging industries. We think it's fascinating because in a way, wellness is kind of going back to basics, right? So when you think about these things, they're almost like the fundamental building blocks of our biology, right? And in a lot of cases, they are free, even though obviously, we live in capitalism, and so there's huge industries emerging around these topics as well. So sleep wellness, that's the thing around the fact that good sleep is emerging as a claim in expected, unexpected places. So there's obviously your tea brands promoting good sleep, but there's also more far-fetched new products and services like sleep boosting pajamas and weighted blankets and neural headbands, and of course cannabis where it's legal, nap pods, meditation apps, and now even a new version of Pokemon that rewards you for sleeping. Sexual wellness is another really interesting one. A lot has been written about the growth of the sex tech industry and how it's a very significant industry now. It's about $122 billion. It's projected to be worth by 2026. And especially the kind of high-end sexual wellness brands targeting women are really reaping the benefits and are really accelerating their growth actually, since COVID. So whether you look at brands like Lilo, that's kind of an upmarket Swedish luxury toy brand, they've said their sales were at plus 40% year on year. And then the final one that the magazine touches on, as you said, is death wellness, which I personally find to be a really fascinating conversation. And again, coming back to what we were saying earlier in the conversation, this is something that the medical professionals are starting to think about as well. And the idea of death wellness is to really think about what is a life well lived and what is a death well died, if you want. And the shift from trying to just prolong the duration of life to trying to prolong the duration of healthy, content life, which also, obviously the counterpoint to that is opening up dialogue around assisted dying and euthanasia and letting people decide when they think that they would like their life to end. So it's not a mainstream conversation yet. I think there's only probably a handful of countries in the world where assisted dying is even legal, but it definitely feels like it is a growing conversation and maybe something that again over the next decade will become mainstream.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So just to summarize everything, it seems like healthy eating was the most mainstream of all these trends, and what we have seen in food is going into different directions, as you said, in sleep, financial, mental, sleep, sex, and even death. So it's like a holistic idea of being well and healthy. And we're going to see more and more brands going into these areas and having new offerings, new innovative ways of talking about wellness of the people in the future. Thank you very much for being with us today. It was great to have you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.